My name is Rachel Bennett. I was 33 years old the afternoon I stood in a hospital corridor in Charlotte, North Carolina, holding a folder with my own name on it, and watched my mother realize I wasn't a ghost. She had buried me 28 years earlier. Not literally. There was no funeral I've ever been able to find record of, no headstone with my name on it, though I looked more than once. But on paper, in a county records office 2 states away, Rachel Ashford died at age 5. A death certificate, a closed file, a story my twin sister had been told so many times that she'd stopped questioning it before she'd even learned to read in cursive. Now that same twin sister was lying in a hospital bed 40 feet from where I stood, and her only real chance of surviving the next 6 months was bone marrow that only I could give her. My mother's face did something I had spent half my life imagining. It didn't crumble. It didn't soften. It just went very, very still, like she was doing math she didn't want to finish. "You're supposed to be dead," she said. I'm not going to pretend that didn't feel good to hear. What she didn't know yet was that I wasn't standing there just as her daughter. I was standing there with a folder full of the exact paperwork that proved what she'd done to keep me dead. And I'd had 3 weeks to decide exactly how I was going to use it. If you're new here, welcome to Betrayal House. This is the channel for stories about the families who are supposed to protect you and don't, and about what happens when the person they underestimated turns out to be the one holding all the evidence. I make these videos because so many of you have written to me about your own families, your own version of being the difficult one, the one who got sent away, the one nobody expected to make it. So before I go further, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now for you. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because none of what happened in that hospital hallway makes sense unless you understand where it started, in a small house outside Charlotte, back when I still believed my parents loved both of their daughters the same amount. I didn't know yet how wrong I was. Let me take you back to when I was 5 years old, because that's really where this story begins. We lived in a town called Hendersonville, about 2 hours from where I live now. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business, except, it turned out, the one piece of business that mattered most. My father, Gerald Ashford, worked at a furniture plant that was already starting to lay people off. My mother, Margaret, stayed home. Home meant me and my twin sister, Olivia. We were identical, but not in the way people usually mean when they say that about twins. Olivia was steady, calm, the kind of baby who slept through the night at 6 weeks old. I was not. I cried more. I got sick more. I needed more. More attention, more patience, more of everything a young couple with a shrinking paycheck didn't have enough of to go around. I don't remember thinking of myself as a burden at 5 years old. Kids don't usually have the vocabulary for that yet. But I remember the weight in the house, the size, the way my mother's voice changed depending on which of our names she was saying. 2 names. 2 completely different tones. I didn't understand it then. I understand it perfectly now. And I remember the last ordinary morning, before everything changed. The smell of my mother's coffee. The sound of Olivia's cartoons through the wall. My father's keys jingling by the door. I didn't know it was the last one. That's the family I'm about to tell you about. Not the family I have now. The family I was born into. The one that decided, when I was 5 years old, that they only had room in their life for one daughter. I had asthma. Bad asthma. The kind that turns a summer cold into 3 days in the emergency room, hooked up to a nebulizer while a nurse counts your breaths per minute out loud. By the time I was 5, I'd been admitted to the hospital 4 times. Each visit came with a bill. Each bill came with an argument, low-voiced, behind a closed bedroom door, that Olivia and I weren't supposed to hear but did anyway, sitting on the hallway floor with our backs against the wall, matching braids, matching pajamas, holding hands without either of us saying why. Our grandmother had given us matching bracelets that Christmas, thin silver child ID bracelets, each stamped with a single letter, an R on mine, an O on Olivia's. We used to trade them just to see if anyone in the house could tell us apart. Nobody ever could. That was the whole point of being a twin, as far as I understood it at 5. We were supposed to be interchangeable. two halves of one stubborn, ordinary thing. My father had a cousin, twice removed, named Frank Bennett. Frank and his wife, Carol, lived 2 counties over. They'd lost a baby of their own the year before, stillborn, 7 months along, and everyone in the extended family knew Carol hadn't been the same since. She wanted a child so badly it showed on her face like a bruise that wouldn't fade. I don't know exactly which of my parents brought it up first. I've read the old letters since. I know Frank offered to help with the medical expenses. I know that offer grew over a few months into something much larger. An offer to take me in permanently, quietly. No lawyers, no courts. Nothing that would show up anywhere official. Just a handshake between 2 men who'd grown up 2 houses apart, and an envelope of cash that covered what my parents owed the hospital, and then some. There is a term for what almost happened to me. Lawyers call it an informal or gray market placement, moving a child between families without ever filing the paperwork a court requires, which means, in plain terms, that legally, nothing happened at all. No judge ever signed off. No adoption was ever finalized. As far as any government record was concerned, I simply vanished from one household and reappeared in another, and nobody with the authority to make that legal ever knew it occurred. I remember the drive to the diner where the handoff happened. I remember the vinyl booth, cold under the backs of my legs. I remember my mother ordering me a chocolate milkshake I didn't finish, because 5-year-olds can tell when something is wrong even if they can't say what. I remember asking where Olivia was. "She's staying with Grandma this weekend," my mother said. "You're going to go stay with Aunt Carol for a little while." A little while. I was still wearing my silver bracelet when Carol and Frank's car pulled out of that gravel lot. I remember pressing my thumb against the stamped letter R the whole ride, the way you press a bruise to check if it still hurts. I believed her. Why wouldn't I have? What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn for another 28 years, was the conversation that happened in the car on the drive home, the one my mother had with my father, the one that decided the rest of my life without me in the room for it. I've since pieced together, from people who were there, what she said. If we tell Olivia she's just living somewhere else, she's going to ask to visit. She's going to ask every week. It's kinder to just let her think. She didn't finish the sentence out loud. She didn't have to. Everyone in that car understood exactly what she meant. It's kinder to just let her think I died. That's the story they gave my sister. Not that I had moved. Not that I was living 2 counties over with people who would come to love me more than the people who gave birth to me. They told my 4-year-old twin sister that her identical twin had died. Some vague explanation involving my asthma. An ER visit gone wrong. Easy enough for a small child to accept and never question again. And Frank and Carol Bennett, the people who took me in, weren't told the truth either. My parents told them I was an only child. No sister. No twin. A clean, complete erasure, cut on both ends, so that there would never be a loose thread for anyone to pull. I grew up in Carol and Frank Bennett's house, not knowing I had a twin at all. Carol became, for all functional purposes, my mother. She was warm in a way I hadn't experienced yet at 5, the kind of warm that shows up as a hand on your back during a thunderstorm, or a plate of food left on the counter without being asked. Frank was quieter, steadier. He taught me to read a bus schedule, to balance a checkbook, to never sign anything I hadn't read twice. They never once asked me to call them Mom or Dad. I did anyway, eventually on my own, the summer I turned 8, and I remember Carol crying at the sink when I said it, though she tried to hide it behind the running water. I didn't know, growing up, that I wasn't legally theirs. Nobody sat a 9-year-old down to explain the difference between a family and a filing. I just knew I was loved, in a house that smelled like cinnamon in the fall, and cut grass in the summer, and that was enough for a long time. It wasn't enough forever, though. There was always a small, cold draft somewhere in the back of my chest. The sense that my life had a beginning I couldn't quite reach. A door that had been closed before I was old enough to remember which room it led out of. I used to lie awake some nights trying to picture the family I'd apparently come from, and coming up with nothing but a shape where a memory should be. The cracks started to show when I was 16, applying for a learner's permit. The Bennetts pulled together the paperwork the DMV required: birth certificate, proof of residency, a guardian signature. And Carol went quiet at the kitchen table for a long moment, looking at a form she'd apparently never actually filled out before. "Carol," I said. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, baby," she said. "I just need to make a call." That call turned into 3 days of hushed conversations behind the same kind of closed doors I remembered from when I was 5. Except this time I was old enough to stand outside them and actually understand fragments of what I heard. Words like guardianship. Words like never finalized. A phrase that stuck with me for years afterward. There's no paper trail here at all. I didn't get the full picture that week. I got enough of it to understand that something about my own existence had never been made official. That on paper, somewhere, I was still listed as belonging to a family I had no memory of. One that had apparently never bothered to let me go the right way, the legal way, the way that would have protected me. That was the moment something in me changed. I decided at 16 years old, sitting at that kitchen table watching Carol's hands shake around a stack of forms, that I would never again let paperwork be the thing that got done wrong when it came to my life. I started reading everything. Contracts, insurance policies, the fine print on the back of parking tickets. I found out I was good at it. Genuinely good. The kind of good where you notice the clause everyone else skipped. The date that doesn't line up. The signature that's missing where a signature should be. The same year I found out about the guardianship gap, I also started the process of legally changing my name. Not because I disliked being called Bennett. I loved it, actually. Loved that it was Carol and Frank's name, and I got to wear it. But because I wanted it to finally be true on paper, the way it had always been true in every other sense. I filed the petition myself the week I turned 18, sat across from a judge who barely looked up from the paperwork, and walked out of that courthouse as Rachel Bennett, legally for the first time in my life. It was the smallest, quietest kind of victory. I remember thinking, even then, that it wouldn't be my last one. By the time I was 22, I had a paralegal certification and a job offer from a small firm in Charlotte that specialized, of all things, in probate and family estate law. The exact kind of law that deals with who inherits what, whose name is on which document, and what happens legally when a family's paperwork doesn't match its reality. I remember sitting in my car in the firm's parking lot after my first day, still in the blazer I'd bought specifically for the interview, thinking, I finally have a skill that makes the world make sense to me. I had no idea yet how much that skill was going to matter. By 33, I had built a life that looked, from the outside, completely unremarkable. A 1-bedroom apartment in South End with good light in the mornings. A steady job at a firm I'd been with for 11 years, respected enough that junior associates came to me instead of the partners when a filing didn't add up. A routine, coffee at the same place every morning, a run along the Greenway on Sundays, dinner with a small, tight circle of friends who knew me as careful, reliable, a little guarded, and never asked too many questions about the family I never talked about. I had made peace, or told myself I had, with the fact that my early childhood was a gap I'd probably never fully fill in. Carol had passed away when I was 26. Frank followed 2 years later. Whatever they knew about where I'd come from, they took most of it with them, and I'd stopped digging, mostly because there didn't seem to be anywhere left to dig. I'd taken the DNA test 3 years earlier on a whim, the way half my office had, more curious about the % Scottish breakdown than anything else. I remember opening the results back then and feeling a small, quiet disappointment at how ordinary they were. Mostly Northern European, a scattering of nothing surprising. No long-lost family waiting in the Relatives tab. I'd closed the app and more or less forgotten it existed. It sat on my phone for 3 years, updating quietly in the background every time the company's database grew, the way those things do, waiting for exactly the right stranger to submit exactly the right sample. Then, on a Tuesday in early June, I got a notification on my phone from a consumer DNA site I'd used years earlier, more out of curiosity than anything else, back when everyone in my office was mailing off cheek swabs during a slow month at work. New close relative match, the notification said. 99.8% shared DNA. Relationship, identical twin. I sat at my desk for a full minute just staring at it. I didn't have a twin. As far as I knew, I didn't have any siblings at all. I clicked through anyway, The way you click through anything at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday when your brain refuses to process what it's looking at. A profile picture loaded. Blurry. A woman about my age, my own jawline staring back at me from a stranger's face. Her name was listed as Olivia A. I didn't reach out that day. I told myself I needed time to think, which was true, but underneath that was something closer to fear. The specific fear of finding a door in your own life you never knew was there, and not being sure you want to know what's behind it. I didn't have to decide, in the end. 4 days later, my office phone rang, and a woman introduced herself as Dana Whitfield, a transplant coordinator at a hospital I'd never had a reason to think about. A hospital 2 hours away, in Hendersonville. "I'm calling," she said, "because our system flagged a genetic match through a national donor and ancestry database, and I need to speak with you about a patient of ours. Her name is Olivia Ashford. I understand this may come as a surprise, but our records indicate you may be a biological sibling, a twin, in fact, and she is in urgent need of a bone marrow transplant." I remember gripping the edge of my desk. "I don't have a sister," I said. There was a pause on the line, the particular kind of pause a professional takes when they're about to say something they know is going to break someone open. "According to Olivia's medical history and family intake forms," Dana said carefully, "she was told her twin sister passed away at age 5. Ma'am, is your name Rachel Ashford?" I sat completely still. "My legal name is Rachel Bennett," I said. "But yes, I believe it used to be." Dana explained the rest gently, in the plain, unhurried language of someone who delivered hard news for a living. Olivia had a condition called aplastic anemia. In simple terms, her bone marrow, the soft tissue inside her bones that manufactures blood cells, had essentially stopped working, leaving her body unable to make enough healthy blood on its own. The only real cure, Dana said, was a transplant of healthy marrow from a donor whose tissue type closely matched hers, something called an HLA match, a genetic fingerprint doctors use to predict whether a donor's cells will be accepted by a patient's body instead of rejected. Siblings, especially identical twins, are usually the strongest possible match. A stranger might offer a partial fit. A twin, Dana said, could offer something close to perfect. "That's why we don't stop looking," she told me, "even when a family says there's no one left." What I didn't say, what I couldn't say yet, because I didn't have the words for it, was that in the space of one phone call, I had just learned 2 things I would spend the next several weeks trying to hold at the same time. I had a twin sister, and she had believed her entire life, that I had died. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in a chair I never sit in my apartment, replaying the phone call over and over, trying to feel something specific, grief or joy or anger, and instead just feeling the strange, flat static of too much information arriving all at once. Around midnight, I called my closest friend, Priya, and just said the words out loud for the first time, to see if they sounded as impossible spoken as they did in my head. "I have a twin sister. She thinks I've been dead since I was 5. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, what do you need from me right now? Someone to sit with you, or someone to help you make a plan?" "A plan," I said. "I don't know how to sit with this yet." "Then let's make a list," she said. And for the next hour, over the phone, we did exactly that. A plain, practical list of what I actually knew versus what I was only assuming, the kind of list I'd normally make for a client, not for my own life. It helped more than I expected. It gave the static somewhere to go. The next morning, I did the thing I always do when I don't know what to feel. I went to work, and I found the one person I trusted to tell me what any of this actually meant, legally and otherwise. David Reyes had been my supervising attorney for 9 years, and my closest thing to a mentor since Frank died. He specialized in exactly the kind of tangled family law I'd spent my career quietly obsessing over. Guardianships, contested estates, cases where nobody's paperwork matched anybody's memory. I closed his office door behind me and told him everything, start to finish. The DNA match, the phone call, the sister I apparently had, and apparently, in every legal sense, didn't exist. David listened without interrupting, which was its own kind of kindness. Okay, he said when I finished. First thing, and I want you to hear this as a friend before you hear it as a paralegal. You're allowed to feel whatever you're feeling. You don't have to have it figured out today. I don't have time to not have it figured out, I said. She needs marrow, David. Soon. He nodded slowly. Then let's talk about the practical side because I think that's going to be where you feel steadiest right now. He explained it the way he explained everything, in language a client with no legal background could actually use. A death certificate, he said, is a legal record, a formal declaration, filed with a state or county, that a specific person has died. Once it's filed, that person is, in the eyes of the law, gone. Their estate can be settled. Insurance policies can pay out. Their name can be closed on every account that mattered. If there's a death certificate on file for you, David said, somebody filed it. Death certificates don't file themselves. Someone submitted a cause of death, a date, a signature. And if you're sitting in my office very much alive, that means somebody either made a catastrophic clerical error or somebody lied. And if they lied? I asked. Then depending on what else was tied to that filing, insurance, inheritance, benefits, we're not just talking about a family secret anymore, he said. We're talking about fraud, possibly a felony depending on what your state's statute of limitations looks like and whether it was ever reopened. I sat with that for a moment. There's something else, I said. Carol and Frank, the family who raised me, I don't think they ever adopted me. Not legally. I remember something being wrong with the paperwork when I was 16. David leaned back in his chair. Then legally, depending on how this was handled, you may never have left your birth family's custody on paper at all, which means whoever declared you dead didn't just lie about a death. They may have erased a living custodial child from every system that was supposed to be protecting her. What does statute of limitations actually mean, practically? I asked. I know the term. I've filed motions citing it 100 times. I've never had to think about it applying to my own life. In plain terms, David said, it's just a clock. The law gives prosecutors a limited window to charge someone after a crime happens, and once that window closes, they generally can't anymore, even with solid proof. For fraud, that clock often doesn't start running until the fraud is discovered, not when it happened. Which in your case might mean the clock only started ticking 11 days ago. I felt something settle in my chest. Not comfort exactly, but clarity. For the first time since Dana Whitfield's phone call, I had a direction. I need to see the actual records, I said. All of them. The death certificate. Any insurance filing tied to it. Whatever exists from when I was placed with Carol and Frank. David slid a legal pad across the desk toward me. Then let's build you a file, he said. Because if you're about to walk into a room with the people who did this, Rachel, you are not walking in with a feeling. You're walking in with proof. It took me 11 days to build that file, working it the way I'd worked every case that ever mattered to me. Carefully, patiently, one document at a time, treating my own childhood like evidence because, in every sense that counted, it was. I started with the county register of deeds in the district that covered Hendersonville, requesting a certified copy of my own death certificate. It felt absurd, standing at that counter, sliding my driver's license across to a clerk who looked at me and said, "You know this says you're deceased, right?" "I'm aware," I told her. "I'd like a copy anyway." She processed the request without further comment. The fluorescent lights humming overhead, a wall clock ticking somewhere behind the counter with the specific loudness of a room where nobody's in a hurry. I remember the smell of that office. Old paper, toner, the particular mustiness of a records room that's held decades of other people's births and deaths in filing cabinets that never quite closed all the way. The certificate came back 3 days later. Rachel Marie Ashford. Date of death, 14 months after I'd been placed with Carol and Frank. Cause of death, complications from acute respiratory illness. The kind of vague, plausible language that wouldn't raise questions from anyone who hadn't watched me, alive and breathing, eating cereal at a kitchen table 2 counties away on that exact date. The signature on the certificate belonged to a physician I'd never heard of, at a clinic that, according to the state medical board's records, had closed its doors 9 years ago, amid a licensing investigation completely unrelated to me. I sat with that certificate in my apartment for a long time before I went looking for the next piece. The next piece took longer. I filed a request with a life insurance carrier, one I found listed in an old filing cabinet of Frank's that Carol had kept in storage, boxes I'd never gone through until now, boxes I'd been avoiding since the day Frank died. Buried in one of them was a single folded document, a rider on a policy, a child life insurance policy, taken out on both Olivia and me when we were infants. The kind of small policy a lot of working-class families buy, more out of superstition than expectation, thinking they'll never actually need it. The claim history attached to that policy told me the rest. 14 months and 6 days after I was handed off in that diner booth, a death claim was filed. Paid out. $41,000, deposited into an account belonging to Gerald and Margaret Ashford. I read that number 3 times before it fully landed. They hadn't just given me a way to solve a short-term financial problem. They'd been paid twice. That's when I understood, sitting alone at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night with a stack of certified documents spread out in front of me, like a hand of cards nobody wanted to be dealt. My parents hadn't lost a daughter and quietly moved on. They had manufactured my death on paper for money, and then built an entire story around that lie sturdy enough to convince a 4-year-old, and keep convincing her for the next 28 years. I want to pause here for a second, because I know a lot of you watching this have your own version of a moment like mine. The moment you found the one piece of paper, the one text message, the one bank statement that changed how you understood your entire childhood. If that's you, I want to know. Tell me in the comments, what was the piece of evidence that finally made everything make sense? I read every single one of these, and I promise you, you are not the only person in this comment section who's been there. Now let me tell you what happened next, because finding out the truth turned out to be the easy part. Word travels strangely in families that have spent decades hiding things. I still don't know exactly how Gerald and Margaret found out I'd resurfaced, whether it was Dana Whitfield's office reaching out to the family for consent forms, or a nurse mentioning a newly located biological sibling within earshot of the wrong relative. But 11 days after that first phone call, my cell phone rang with a Hendersonville area code I hadn't seen in 28 years. I almost didn't answer. I'm glad now that I did. Rachel. My mother's voice hadn't changed as much as I expected. Still that same clipped, managing tone. The one she used when she was handling a situation rather than feeling one. It's your mother. I know who it is, I said. I heard you've been in contact with the hospital, she said, skipping past 28 years of silence like it was a commercial break. About Olivia. I have. I want you to understand something, Margaret said, and here her voice shifted, lower, tighter. Whatever you think you know, whatever's in your head about how things happened, it doesn't matter right now. What matters is your sister. She is very sick, Rachel. This isn't the time to go digging up old history and making things complicated. You told her I was dead, I said. There was a silence on the line that told me everything about how she'd hoped this conversation would go, and how badly it was already going instead. We did what we thought was right for everyone at the time, she said. You were paid, I said. I have the insurance claim, Mom. I have the death certificate. I have the placement records. Or the lack of them. I know exactly what happened. Her voice went cold in a way I remembered from being 5 years old, sitting on that hallway floor, listening through a door. You were never supposed to come back, she said. Some doors get closed for a reason, Rachel. If you cared even a little bit about your sister, you'd let this go and just do what she needs you to do, quietly, without turning it into some kind of performance. I felt my hand tighten around the phone. Being her donor isn't a performance, I said. Wanting the truth isn't a performance either. You always did have a flair for the dramatic, she said. Even at 5. I hung up before I said something I might have regretted. Though looking back now, I'm not sure there was anything I could have said that I would have actually regretted. My father called 2 days later, and where my mother had been cold, he tried something closer to reasonable, which was somehow worse. We did what we had to do, Gerald said. Times were hard, Rachel. You don't remember how hard. Frank and Carol gave you a good life. Better than what we could have given you back then, if we're being honest. You turned out fine, didn't you? You've got a good job. A nice apartment, from what I hear. What exactly is it you think digging all this up is going to fix? You faked my death for money, I said. That's not a hard time, Dad. That's a crime. Watch your tone, he said, an old reflex, the kind that used to work on a 5-year-old, and clearly still expected to work on a 33-year-old paralegal with a folder full of certified documents. You want to march in there and blow up everything right when your sister needs this family to hold together? Fine. But you think hard about what that makes you. I hung up on him too. 3 days later, they showed up at my office. Not called ahead, not scheduled. Just stood at the reception desk of a probate law firm at 4 p.m, asking for me by a last name that hadn't belonged to me since I was 18. I met them in the lobby because I didn't want them anywhere near the file room. You can't just show up here, I said. We didn't know how else to reach you, Margaret said, glancing around at the firm's framed diplomas like she was pricing them. This is a nice office. Guess Carol and Frank did all right by you after all. Don't, I said. I'm just saying, she said. You landed on your feet. Maybe better than you would have with us, honestly. Isn't that worth something? Doesn't that count for anything, in the math you seem so determined to do? You don't get credit for a life you tried to erase, I said. You don't get to call it a favor. My father stepped in then, his voice pitched low, almost gentle, which was somehow worse than either of their sharper moments. We're asking you, as your parents, to think about your sister before you think about yourself. Don't you want her to get better without all of this hanging over her? She's already sick because of a choice you made, I said. Withholding the truth from her now isn't protecting her. It's just protecting you. One more time, the same way it always has been. Neither of them had an answer for that. They left without saying goodbye. And I stood in that lobby for a long time afterward, watching the elevator doors close, understanding for the first time just how far they were willing to go to keep controlling a story that no longer belonged only to them. That same week, a text came through from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't open it. Hi, this is Olivia. Dana gave me your number. I hope that's okay. I don't really understand what's happening, but the hospital keeps saying my sibling donor, and I don't have a sibling. Is this some kind of mistake? I stared at that message for a long time before I answered it. My sister, reaching toward me in the dark, with no idea yet what she was actually reaching toward. It's not a mistake, I wrote back finally. I think we need to talk. Can I call you? She called me instead, 4 minutes later, and for 20 minutes we talked around the edges of everything. Her chemo schedule, my job, the strange fact that both of us apparently hated cilantro, carefully avoiding the one question neither of us was ready to ask out loud yet. I didn't tell her the truth on that call. I'd promised myself I wouldn't. Not until I could say it to her face, with proof in my hands, so that nobody else would ever get the chance to tell it wrong. But hearing her voice for the first time, steady, a little tired, unmistakably familiar in a way that had nothing to do with memory, I understood exactly how much was riding on getting this right. Here's what raised the stakes for me, though. What turned this from a private grievance into something I couldn't just walk away from. 2 days after that second call, David got a call of his own, from a family law attorney representing my parents, asking, politely, formally, whether Rachel Bennett intended to involve herself in Olivia's medical decision-making, and suggesting that any attempt to publicize matters related to the family's private history could be viewed as harassment. They weren't just trying to keep me quiet. They were trying to get ahead of me, legally, before I ever had the chance to say a word to the one person who actually deserved to hear it. That's when I understood that if I waited, if I let them manage this the way they'd managed everything else for 28 years, I might never get the chance to tell my sister the truth myself, in my own words, before someone else's version of it reached her first. I called Dana Whitfield the next morning. I need to know the timeline, I told her. When does Olivia need the transplant, realistically? Her doctors want to move within 3 to 4 weeks if your compatibility testing confirms what the registry match suggests, Dana said. I have to be honest with you, Rachel. Her numbers are not where we'd want them. We don't have a lot of room to wait. Then I need one thing from you, I said. I need to be in the room the day the family meets with her medical team to finalize the donation plan. Not after. Not around it. In it. There was a pause. That's not unusual for a first-degree relative donor, Dana said carefully. May I ask why that matters so much to you specifically? Because there's something my sister deserves to hear, I said. And I am not going to let anyone else be the one who tells her. David and I spent the next several days building what he kept calling the room. Not a courtroom, not yet. Just the physical, practical shape of the moment I knew was coming. We made 3 copies of every document. The forged death certificate, the insurance claim and payout record, the absence of any adoption filing in either county's archives. We had them bound, tabbed, annotated in plain language, the way you'd prepare an exhibit for someone who had never read a legal document in her life. Because that someone was going to be my sister, lying in a hospital bed, hearing all of this for the first time. We chose the date carefully, the same day as the family conference scheduled before the transplant, the day Olivia's doctors, a hospital social worker, and both sets of parents would already be gathered in one room to finalize logistics. Dana agreed to let me attend as the donor. She didn't know exactly what I was planning to say. I didn't tell her, because I needed that room to happen exactly as it would have anyway. Ordinary, procedural, unsuspecting, right up until the moment it wasn't. The morning of the meeting, I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for 11 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I had the folder on the passenger seat beside me, the same folder I'd have in my hands an hour later, standing in that hallway. I thought about Carol, and what she would have said to me if she were still alive to say it. I thought about the 5-year-old girl in that diner booth, drinking a milkshake she never finished, believing every word her mother told her. Then I got out of the car, and I went inside. The conference room was smaller than I expected. A rectangular table, a whiteboard with a transplant timeline already sketched out in Dana's handwriting, a box of tissues placed with the particular deliberateness of a room that had seen a lot of hard conversations. Gerald and Margaret were already seated when I walked in, and I watched my mother's face do the thing I described at the very beginning of this story. The stillness, the silent math. Olivia was there too, in a wheelchair, thinner than her photo, an IV line taped to the back of one hand, watching me with the particular confusion of someone looking at a face she'd only ever seen in a mirror. "You're supposed to be dead," my mother said. "That's what you told her," I said, nodding toward Olivia. "Isn't it?" Olivia's eyes moved between us, and I watched something click into place behind them. Not the full truth yet, but the first outline of it. "Mom," Olivia said slowly. "What is she talking about?" I set the folder on the table and opened it. The manila edge caught the fluorescent light. Somewhere down the hall, a cartwheel squeaked past the door, ordinary and oblivious, while the room I was standing in came apart at the seams. "My name is Rachel," I said, looking directly at my sister for the first time in 28 years. "I'm your twin. I didn't die when I was 5. I was given away, to a family 2 counties over, in exchange for money to cover our parents' debts. And 14 months after that, they filed a false death certificate in my name and collected $41,000 from a life insurance policy that was supposed to belong to both of us." The room went completely silent, except for the soft, steady beep of the monitor beside Olivia's bed. "That's not true," Margaret said, but her voice had lost every ounce of the certainty it had carried on the phone. I slid the death certificate across the table. "This has your signature witnessed on it," I said. "This is the insurance claim, filed 14 months later, paid to an account with both of your names on it. And this," I slid the third document across, "is a certified statement from both counties, confirming that no adoption of Rachel Ashford was ever filed, anywhere, at any time. Which means, legally, I never actually left your custody. You didn't rehome a daughter. You erased one and got paid for the privilege." My father's face had gone gray. "Rachel, this isn't the place." "You made this the place," I said. "You're the ones who called a lawyer to threaten me for reaching out to my own sister. I'm just finishing the conversation you started." Olivia was crying by now, not loudly, just steady tears sliding down a face that was, in every physical detail, a mirror of my own. "You told me she died," she said to our mother, her voice cracking. I used to leave flowers by the tree in the backyard for her. Every year. On her birthday. Do you understand that? I mourned her every year of my life. We thought it was easier. Margaret started. Easier, Gerald added. Quieter, almost to himself. Doesn't mean it was wrong. Easier for who? Olivia said. And for the first time, I heard something in her voice that sounded exactly like the anger I'd been carrying for weeks. Easier for you. It was never about me. It was never about her. Gerald reached for Margaret's hand, some old reflex of solidarity, and she pulled hers away, and for one strange, quiet moment, I watched the two of them look genuinely afraid of each other, of what the other one might say next, in a room full of people finally equipped to hear it. I signed off on the insurance, Gerald said finally, quietly, to the table more than to any of us. That part was me, not your mother. I filled out the claim. Gerald, Margaret said sharply. They already know, Margaret, he said. They've known since before we walked in here. What's the point of both of us lying about it now? It was the closest thing to an honest sentence I'd ever heard him say. Why? Olivia asked, and her voice cracked fully open on the word. Would you take money for your own daughter's death, when she wasn't even dead? Gerald didn't answer that one. I don't think he had an answer that wouldn't have made it worse. This meeting, Dana Whitfield said carefully, from the corner of the room where she'd been standing frozen through the entire exchange, was scheduled to finalize a transplant plan. I think, given what's just been disclosed, we may need to pause and involve hospital administration and potentially legal counsel before we proceed with anything further today. The transplant still happens, I said quickly, looking at Olivia. Whatever else happens to them, that's separate. You need this. I'm not walking away from that, no matter what they did. Olivia looked at me for a long moment. 28 years of grief and confusion compressed into a single, searching look. Why didn't you come find me sooner? She asked. If you're my sister, why now? Because I didn't know you existed until 11 days ago, I said quietly. I didn't know I had a twin, Olivia. They erased you from my life just as completely as they erased me from yours. That was the detail that broke something open in the room. Not the insurance fraud, not the forged certificate, but the plain, devastating fact that neither of us had ever been allowed to know the other one was real. What none of them had understood, walking into that conference room that morning, was that I hadn't come there to destroy my parents. I'd come there to finally let my sister know the truth on my own terms, before anyone else got the chance to shape it for her. And once that was done, the rest of what happened to Gerald and Margaret Ashford was, frankly, out of my hands. The weeks after that meeting moved faster than the 28 years that came before them. Hospital administration, once informed of what had surfaced in that conference room, was required to loop in adult protective and fraud reporting channels given the nature of the disclosures. The insurance carrier, once notified of a claim potentially obtained through fraudulent death certification, opened its own investigation and referred the matter to the state's insurance fraud division. My father's attorney, the same one who'd called David to threaten me, quietly withdrew from representing the family within the month, once it became clear exactly what he'd almost helped them cover up further. Gerald and Margaret were charged, eventually, with insurance fraud and falsification of a public record. I won't pretend the legal process moved as cleanly or quickly as it does in the version of these stories people wish were true. There were delays, continuances, a plea negotiation that resulted in restitution and probation, rather than the trial I sometimes pictured in my angrier moments. But there was a public record now, permanent and searchable, of exactly what they had done. And for people who had spent nearly 3 decades protecting a lie, that record was its own kind of consequence. David filed, on my behalf, a petition to formally correct my vital records, vacating the death certificate, establishing my legal identity as Rachel Ashford Bennett, closing the 28-year gap between who I had been on paper and who I actually was. The judge who signed the order was, David told me afterward, visibly irritated at having to process a death certificate correction for a woman sitting right in front of her, very much alive, in a blazer and low heels, clutching a folder of her own paperwork like a shield. In 22 years on this bench, the judge said, I've never had to undeclare someone's death based on the person just being present in my courtroom. Consider yourself officially alive again, Ms. Bennett. I laughed harder at that than I expected to. Olivia's transplant happened 19 days after that meeting. I was there in the recovery room when she woke up, and the first thing she said to me, groggy, barely able to keep her eyes open, was, "You came back." "I never left," I told her. "I just didn't know where to come back to." We've spent the better part of a year since then doing the strange, careful work of becoming sisters as adults, trading 28 years of missed birthdays for weekly phone calls, learning each other's coffee orders, comparing the versions of our childhood we'd each been given, mine full of silence, hers full of grief for someone who was never actually gone. It hasn't been simple. There are days it still feels like starting a friendship with a stranger who happens to share my face. But there are other days, more of them now than there used to be, where it feels exactly like what it is, like getting my sister back. During one of those first visits, Olivia opened a small wooden jewelry box on her dresser and took out a thin silver bracelet stamped with a single letter, R. She'd kept it for 28 years, she told me, in a box beside a photograph of the two of us as toddlers, and she used to take it out and hold it whenever she missed me, which was, before we found each other again, most days of her life. I still have mine too. Neither of us ever stopped wearing them, in one form or another, even when we didn't know why. We wear them now on the same wrist, side by side, an R and an O, exactly the way our grandmother meant for us to wear them before anyone decided we should be kept apart. As for Frank and Carol, the parents who actually raised me, I drove out to the small cemetery outside Hendersonville not long after the transplant, and sat by both of their headstones for a while, the way I do a couple of times a year. I told them what had happened. I don't know if that's a foolish thing to do, sitting in a field talking to two people who can't answer back, but I wanted them to know, wherever that kind of thing gets heard, that the paperwork finally got fixed, that the girl they raised without a single official document to their name turned out fine anyway, because they never once treated love as something that needed a filing to be real. David still asks about Olivia every time I see him in the office kitchen, and I think more than the case itself, what stayed with him was watching a client find her own evidence, instead of waiting for someone else to hand it to her. Dana Whitfield still works transplant coordination at that hospital, and she tells me now, a year on, that our case changed how her team talks to patients about donor registries, that she pushes harder now to ask families directly, early, whether there's anyone the patient was told was gone who might actually still be findable. I still have the folder. It sits on a shelf in my apartment now, not hidden in a drawer anymore, not something I need to carry into a room to prove anything. Just a record, the way every ending in my line of work eventually becomes a record, of what was taken and what eventually was recovered. If there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this. The people who are supposed to protect you don't always tell you the truth, even about the biggest things, especially about the biggest things. But paperwork doesn't lie the way people do. Records sit patiently, waiting for someone patient enough to go looking. If something in your life has never quite added up, you're allowed to go looking too. You're allowed to ask the hospital, the county office, the insurance company, for exactly what they have on file with your name on it. You are allowed to know the truth about your own life. I spent 28 years believing my story started with a diner booth and a chocolate milkshake I never finished. It didn't. It started long before that, in a house where love was measured out unevenly, and it very nearly ended in a filing cabinet 2 counties away, in a folder marked closed. It took one flagged DNA match, one phone call from a stranger doing her job well, and one very patient paralegal to reopen it. You don't have to be loud to win. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who's been keeping the receipts the whole time. If this story reminded you of something in your own family, a silence that never made sense, a piece of paper you've been meaning to request, a sibling or relative you were told not to ask about, I want to hear it. Tell me in the comments. And if you made it all the way to the end of this one, do me a favor. Hit subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's not too late to find out the truth. And I'll see you in the next story.